necessary because some people are under the mistaken belief that we have come here to cause a ceasefire. We haven't come here to cause to bring about a ceasefire. We have come here to determine whether Zimbabwe shall be free or not. We are at war with Ian Smith. And the war must continue until he's able to tell the British government that he has surrendered. But before he has surrendered, well, the fighting has got to continue.
Would you like to see a Marxist state in Rhodesia when it goes independent, Zimbabwe?
I want a socialist state, yes, which is based on principles that are drawn from all socialist systems that are available, that have had experience, and so on.
Will you be prepared to see farmers owning their own land in your state?
Well, for a beginning they can. Why not? But as we stated, it's preferable that the land belongs to the people as such. That's traditional, and it also is in accord with our socialist ideals.
Mr. Mugabe, your position to some people will look like a very tough one. Does this mean you want the conference to fail?
The failure of the conference cannot be laid upon our shoulders. It's entirely the responsibility of the British government, because right from the onset we have been demanding from the British government that they participate in the conference in their capacity as the colonial power, and that they must assume the role of a decolonization power. But Britain has indicated that it's not willing to do that. And if the conference fails, please don't blame us for its failure. Yes, this is what we have done. That's the meaning of our signing the agreement. It means we are committed to honoring the ceasefire. But it takes two to honor the ceasefire. There are two parties to the conflict. And if one side chooses to dishonor the ceasefire and does so persistently in a manner that threatens to destroy the basis of the ceasefire, then the other party is equally entitled to dishonor that ceasefire.
Rafaro Stadium, Harare Township, just outside of Salisbury, to be renamed shortly after midnight, Independence Stadium. At that time, the Union Jack will come down the mast and the new colours, the new flag of Zimbabwe will be hoisted.
The farmers arrived at the meeting from all over the Bulawayo area, all of them heavily armed and all sharing a sense of frustration and bitterness at the rising level of violence in MATABELELAND that has left 6 of their colleagues dead since New Year, killed by dissident guerrillas said to be loyal to Joshua Nkomo.
I mean, we were disgusted and very, very upset when those foreign lads were all ambushed and taken away. But with what happened here, so close, I mean, we were all together here on the Sunday before Christmas when we had the children's party. And then New Year comes and that dreadful thing had happened.
Joining them by helicopter, 2 senior black army officers for a rare meeting to discuss the worsening security situation. Mugabe's military advisors told the farmers the 5,000 dissidents can be crushed and are planning to bring in the notorious 5th Brigade to sweep the area. But farmers like Rob Sayers remain unconvinced. His automatic rifle discarded at Independence now never leaves his side, and his farm looks as it did during the war. Grenade screens are firmly in place over the bedroom windows, and his Agric alert set, which links his farm to the police station 25 miles away, has been reactivated.
I read you threes with a lot of static behind you.
For his wife, Ali, the situation is now worse than at the height of the war.
During the war, I was never scared, genuinely. We were in the thick of it. Today you went to where the front line was, which is not far up the road, as you know. We always knew that if anything happened, we were not only self-sufficient here, but we knew help would come very, very quickly. And now you don't know when help is coming. I think this is the main thing, is the insecurity.
But the farmers' problems are not limited to security. They're suffering the worst drought in memory. Maize like this should be 6 foot high at this time of year. And the country's fuel crisis means the farmers now have 50% less fuel than at the height of sanctions during the war. Blacks too have been caught up in the tribal fighting. More than 120 of them have died in the violence that's followed Nkomo's sacking from government. Philip Moyo was the latest victim, a top ZAPU official and personal friend of Joshua Nkomo. He was bayoneted to death by a group of dissidents. At his funeral, Mr. Nkomo warned that the dissident problem could not be solved by the military.
Violence had an aim of destroying an enemy that refused to listen to sense. And this is why we picked up arms. After we have got Zimbabwe, we do not want to see anybody, be he in authority, out of authority, using force to try and solve problems of this country. I don't care who it is. I say, I don't care whether that person is an authority or is out of authority. No problem of Zimbabwe can be solved by violence.
Joshua Nkomo believes that the answer to the escalating violence in MATABELELAND is a political settlement, some sort of agreement that would bring the dissidents out of the bush. He's had several meetings with the Prime Minister to discuss these proposals, but Mr. Mugabe and his security officials remain convinced that force must be met by force.
The dry, inhospitable landscape of the Manica district in Zimbabwe, a region that appears to have been untouched by the modern world. Farming methods have remained the same for centuries. But after 4 years of drought, the people here are struggling to survive. The farmers are now looking to the government to help them. And part of the ruling party's election campaign is to promise those in the rural areas a better deal. 14 years after independence, land has again become one of Zimbabwe's most contentious issues. And the focus, as in the past, revolves around the fact that much of the best land is still owned by whites. It's land that the government now says it will hand over to the black indigenous population.
We have areas where we have high population densities. And mostly those are the African people who were driven during the colonial days in those areas which are dry, poor rainfall, poor soil, very unproductive. Now, our program is to remove people from those areas and put them in areas where there is rich soil, high rainfall, which is really where most of the commercial farmers are.
Mike Clark is one of 70 commercial farmers whose land has been designated for resettlement, and he's angry. He bought the farm shortly after independence and built his own irrigation system. It's this, he says, rather than the quality of the land, which has made his farm viable, while the local black farmers around him have been unable to survive the drought. When the government told him he'd have to sell up under their policy of indigenisation, he took the issue to court and lost. Since the ruling, the banks have stopped lending him money, and he's steadily going bankrupt.
I was absolutely stunned. I just couldn't believe it, because we were told that it was underutilized properties and absentee owners and foreign-owned land and so on. And I don't fall under any of those categories. This is a country that I've been brought up in, lived in all my life, and I love it. We've gone through our ups and downs like every country has, but you can't let politics affect your decisions on whether you're going to stay in a country or not. Politicians come and go.
White farmers are not the only ones who feel they're being unfairly treated by the Mugabe government. 90% of private business in Zimbabwe is also still controlled by whites. Those companies too are now being targeted as part of the country's indigenization program. It was this student demonstration in the capital Harare that brought the issue in the cities to a head. After marching through the streets protesting against all white-owned business, the students later turned their attack on Sandro's nightclub. The students claim the owner of the club is a racist. His clientele is mostly white and rich, and his cover charge, they say, is prohibitive to most of the black population. It's an allegation the owner says took him by surprise.
These guys that told me that they wanted to come in because they wanted to complain about racism. I don't know what racism has to do with Sanders. I mean, I cannot even defend myself or my establishment on an accusation which has no sense. Half of the cabinet from the early days come and drink here. It is a very well-known fact.
The student protest, though, was supported by many black businessmen who are also frustrated that little has changed in the private business sector since independence. Philip Chiangwa has run his own sheet metal company for the past 10 years and has recently set up an affirmative action group. The idea is to put pressure on the government to speed up its indigenization program in the run-up to the election.
The scenario should change. It should change to favor the black people of this country. Across Africa, of course, you have observed that in Zaire, the economy is in the hands of the Zairians. In Zambia, in the hands of Zambians. In Malawi, in the hands of Malawians. And as such, would like Zimbabwe to be the hands of black Zimbabweans.
We would want to see possession, actual possession of the assets of the people in their own hands, our hands. Possession of power, we have political power. Possession of the actual economic assets, we don't have to the extent that entitles us to say the economy is indigenized.
One of the most vocal critics of the government's policy is the former Rhodesian Prime Minister, Ian Smith. He's among the 100,000 whites who stayed on in the country after independence and says that indigenization simply won't work.
It is a fact of life, and this has got nothing to do with racialism, that most of the skills and professionalism did happen to be in the hands of the white people. They brought it with them here. If you drive that away, then you are detracting from the efficiency. Sadly, 2/3 of our white population have left since Mugabe came in, because they could see no future, because they were tired of having insult and abuse hurled at them. That's what this government has done.
For the next few weeks, though, in the run-up to the election, the government still sees its policy of indigenization as the best way to win back support. After 14 years of black political rule, many Zimbabweans are still no better off than they were before independence. What those, particularly in the rural areas, are now demanding is not political but economic control. And the government is coming under increasing pressure to deliver. Judy Aslett, Channel 4 News, Zimbabwe.
It looks innocent enough, a simple celebration, but these are squatters who've just occupied another farm belonging to a white farmer. In the last month alone, 600 farms have been seized across Zimbabwe by veterans of the independence war and supporters of President Mugabe. There are around 20,000 British passport holders in Zimbabwe. Now the Foreign Office is drawing up plans to accept many of them.
We have contingency plans if things get really bad. I hope it won't happen. It really shouldn't happen. These people want to stay there and contribute to the country's future, and the government of Zimbabwe should allow them to do so.
The problem is, though, that Zimbabwe is slowly descending into anarchy, and President Mugabe is exploiting this instability. A mass exodus may not be on the cards just yet, But there's no doubt that white farmers here feel they're under siege.
It's a political thing, and nobody must kid themselves that it's anything else. It's the last-minute ditch by this government to intimidate people.
Next month, President Mugabe faces parliamentary elections, which could result in another vote against his ruling party. Tonight, the Foreign Office confirmed that there had been an increase in applications for British passports to be renewed in Zimbabwe.
This morning, the farmers from Marandera put up a plane to check what was happening on the land. All clear. But the allies of the people who killed farmer David Stevens on Saturday have taken over his house. It's been looted and trashed. His membership of the opposition MDC may have been what caused his death. ZANU-PF are in charge here now. They've burnt what they wanted. They decide who goes in and out. Stephen's widow's been staying with a friend. She's leaving, but only for a while.
I feel very strongly that I have lost a husband for something we were fighting for, personally and as a country. And I feel that I would like to stay and see through that we get democratic elections.
Bruce Gemmell, whose son Stuart was beaten up over the weekend, went home to ensure that his workers are okay.
I'm not going away because I don't want to stay here, but I'll be back tomorrow.
He'll bring his family home tomorrow if it's safe.
Boringly quiet. Nothing. No shooting, no death, no nothing.
Like David Stevens, the farmer killed on Saturday, Gemmell's an active supporter of the opposition MDC.
If you're just going to stay here for the sunshine and the servants, you're not really a proper citizen. And so you've got to take the risks and responsibilities, I think. If you're going to claim that you want the rights of citizenship, then you must qualify.
After the farmers left at the weekend, some of the labourers also fled, afraid that the ZANU supporters might come here and beat them up. That's one reason that farmers like Bruce Gemmell are keen to get back on their land and back to their farms and encourage their workers to stay here. But some farm labourers who've been threatened by ZANU-PF supporters told me they're beginning to wish their white bosses would keep out of politics. Today, the leader of the Commercial Farmers Union saw President Mugabe. Most Zimbabweans believe he is the only person who can bring order back to the country. Lindsay Hilsum, Channel 4 News, Marandera, Zimbabwe.
Another farmhouse lay in ruins today, another family destroyed. It was a murderous attack on a remote property in the south of the country that left Martin Olds shot dead on his own doorstep. He was the father of 2 teenage children.
They had a wonderful father who they loved very dearly. He was very proud of them. He was an upstanding member of the farming community, and we are absolutely devastated.
What happened here at Silver Stream Farm was not a land seizure. Around 100 men forced their way onto the property intent on killing. Mr. Olds frantically radioed for help, but none arrived. There were reports of repeated gunfire. It appears that the farmer shot back. It was a desperate last stand against overwhelming odds. The police were reluctant to get involved and arrived too late, and neighbouring farmers were powerless to intervene.
So the farmers at the moment are feeling pretty isolated.
Yeah, we are pretty isolated. We're not allowed by law to have automatic firearms. Not that that is going to make any difference, but we do feel very insecure to the fact that we don't know who to turn to.
Before they left, the attackers firebombed the house and a truck parked in front. They've shattered a cautious optimism that things here might improve.
There had been hopes that the farm crisis was at an end, that President Mugabe might call off the war veterans. But what's happened here suggests that the violence in Zimbabwe is far from over.
Farm buildings were torched in other parts of the country too. Mr. Mugabe's supporters now roaming at will. As property burned, the president, who'd seemed conciliatory yesterday, had a chilling message for the farmers.
You are now our enemies because you really have behaved as enemies of Zimbabwe. that we are full of anger, and our entire community is angry.
But whites aren't the only victims. In a Harare township today, they were mourning another political slaying. The victim here, the man who acted as driver for the leader of the opposition. So, as Mr. Mugabe's supporters danced to celebrate 20 years of independence and Silver Stream Farm continued to smoulder, the country appeared another step closer to anarchy. Tim Ewart, ITN, Southern Zimbabwe.
They came to Chinoi chanting, "Hondo, it's war." Government vehicles were provided. The ruling party in Zimbabwe sees no division between itself and the state. School children were bussed in, war veterans, members of the Women's League, people who've bought the message. Vote ZANU-PF if you want land. Vote ZANU-PF if you want to keep white people out of government.
Zimbabwe is our country.
Yes.
We don't want whites to rule us.
Yeah. They had to wait for the big man. Campaigning is continuing to the last minute. As the dancers entertained the crowd, one of Mr. Mugabe's aides told me that if the president wanted to hold a rally during the voting over the weekend, he would. We are the government, he said, and we make up the rules. At times, the entertainment seemed more popular than the politics. Even the local white commercial farmers came, out of courtesy, they said. A group of war veterans drove round the area last night, threatening to take over farms where the owner refused to provide transport to bring labourers to the rally. And then he swept in. He almost skipped around the crowd. It was the same uncompromising message. Anti-white, anti-British, harking back to the struggle for liberation.
So what can the British government teach us at all about democracy? We learned colonial oppression from them. Let them keep their loud mouths shut and shut forever in regard to items or issues like democracy relating to Zimbabwe.
The opposition leader, Morgan Tsvangirai, is a stooge of the British, according to the president. He spent the morning on a walkabout in Harare, where he's popular. But despite the rapid rise of the MDC, it will be very hard to dislodge ZANU-PF with its monolithic power. Overnight, there were clashes between rival supporters. A bus was burnt out in Harare. Polling continues throughout the weekend. Mr. Mugabe made a final dig at the man he regards as the opposition's master.
We are the sovereign people here. Let the Blair government learn that lesson if it hasn't learned it. Well, we'll teach it a lesson tomorrow and Sunday.
So this was President Mugabe's last appeal to the voters. But he knows that even if the MDC does win a majority of seats in Parliament, he's still the president and he chooses the next government. He says that government will be ZANU-PF and he's never going to share power. Lindsay Hilsum, Channel 4 News, Chinoi, Zimbabwe. The last day of campaigning, and President Mugabe's been working the crowd just outside Harare. The banners tell the story. He's fighting a man who isn't even contesting the election.
What we have here rejected is the continuation of neocolonialism.
But somehow, disputes with past British leaders don't seem to irk him like the present one.
So we sat down 1983 in New Delhi, and we had, a man-to-man talk. She was a man-to-man talk. Thatcher was a man-woman, and we agreed. Said no. If they are tried, fair trial, fine. And we shook hands. That's it.
The preoccupations of one man defining a country. Mr. President, all this talk of colonialism and Tony Blair, isn't it time for a new message?
No, Tony Blair, why is he concerned about Zimbabwe? It's a serious matter here. You know, interference with our sovereignty is not permissible at international law. Why does he continue to have this obsession with Zimbabwe? Who is he? What is he to us?
He never mentions you anymore, sir, but you mention him.
What margin of... Well, if he ceases not only mentioning, but even working clandestinely and surreptitiously within the European Union in order to get action taken against us, if he ceases doing that, well and good, we'll recognize that.
As the President sweeps away from the last rally, the message he leaves the people with is history. Ian Smith, Lancaster House, British colonialism. That's what he talks about. You might think that these are the obsessions of an old man, but he says that's what young Zimbabweans should be thinking about when they go to vote tomorrow. It's a message repeated at rallies across the country. At 81, he's tireless, denouncing the opposition MDC as traitors and sellouts to the white man, stooges and puppets of that white man.
Iwe Blair, British colonialism yakafakari. We fought it, we defeated it.
They're thanking President Mugabe for bringing computers to their school. He's also brought his version of patriotic history, now taught in schools and colleges across Zimbabwe. Some call it Mugabeism, a vision of the past with Mugabe and his party ZANU-PF as heroes, winning the war against white rule in 1980, and now seizing the land from white farmers.
There was oppression by British settlers. And now the same British would want to preach democracy to us. Nonsense. We taught them democracy, that there is need for democracy, and we brought democracy to Zimbabwe. One man, one woman, one vote in 1980.
The people listen. He tells them there's no money for fertilizer, so they must go back to using cow dung. He went barefoot as a child, he says, but today's children complain if they have no shoes. You wouldn't think that going backwards would be a vote winner, but it seems to work with some.
We love our president because he has respect for black people. He doesn't want us to remain slaves. We want to get our inheritance because this is our place and we should be the masters.
Heroes Acre, designed by the North Koreans to glorify Zimbabwe's armed struggle and its leader. The monument to the unknown soldier looking over the graves of dead comrades. At Heroes Acre, President Mugabe is portrayed as the victor in the war for liberation, and he's still campaigning on that in today's elections, a quarter of a century on. ZANU-PF does mention bread and butter issues like food or healthcare, but essentially for them this is ideological. It's the next phase in the liberation struggle. Now, the struggle for people's minds. We pursued the man who honed that message for Mugabe. But Jonathan Moyo, his former chief ideologue, has lost out in a power struggle inside ZANU-PF and is contesting the elections as an independent. Now he says ZANU-PF has shortchanged the people.
They've gotten a lot of ideological talk about sovereignty, about democracy, and all these things. But that has obviously not translated to the sort of everyday life things.
Many would say that's a bit rich from him. But as he campaigns in his home constituency of Sholotsho, he's telling people that Mugabe's time has gone. The dispute inside ZANU-PF was about who would succeed the president when he supposedly retires in 2008.
Clearly, no sane person expects him to run again after these 36 months. And if he does run again, no sane person expects him to win. And if this sort of thing continues, no sane person expects him to have a successor running on a ZANU-PF ticket to win.
Every night before the TV news, they show scenes from the colonial past. Tony Blair, you're tainted with Iraq, they sing. Zimbabweans are free. Zimbabwe came through a bloody war. Let's vote for the liberation of Zimbabwe, so we shame Tony Blair and his stooges. It's the campaign of an old man preparing his legacy. Zimbabwe is still in thrall to Robert Mugabe as he stamps his final imprint on the country's history. Lindsay Hilsum, Channel 4 News, Harare.
Baby dumping's what they call it. It happens when parents, too poor, too sick, too hungry to feed, clothe and send their children to school, just abandon them. 60 dumped children found salvation in a church-run orphanage on the outskirts of Harare. Many AIDS orphans, some of them HIV positive. Baby dumping has surged since the government of Robert Mugabe launched Operation Murambatsvina, Operation Drive Out the Filth. In just a few weeks, and against a background of already spiralling poverty and social disintegration, 750,000 people lost their homes and their livelihoods. A year on from what the UN branded an unjustified catastrophe, the Solidarity Peace Trust paints a grim picture of just how bad things now are. The state of meltdown is dire, the report says. Almost nothing done to house those who lost everything, just a handful of new houses, no jobs. People living, the report says, in a state of permanent existential crisis. No way out.
This is a failure. Because they must know that everyone is a human being who also wants to stay in a house.
The government's house-building programme itself mired in scandal, the report says. Most of the few hundred units that have been built ending up in the hands of government cronies or the Zimbabwean army.
They were supposed to be for us because the government destroyed our houses. Now it's putting its own people. For what reason? Why?
But the Solidarity Peace Trust calls on the United Nations and the international community to overlook for the moment the question of who lives in the houses and just get on with building some, as the urban poor whom the government cleansed are still urban, albeit homeless, and are now even poorer. The cameraman enters a shack, stumbling by chance across the harrowing reality of Mugabe's Zimbabwe. A dead body, untended, unburied. Funeral costs often too much to bear. With 75% unemployment, 4 out of every 5 Zimbabweans eke a living from the informal sector, which the government has declared illegal. With tens of thousands now living on the run and sliding ever further into poverty, an urgent need, the Trust says, to decriminalise street vendors and build new markets. In an eastern suburb of the capital, 6 orphaned children living with their grandparents. They're all AIDS orphans too. But this old couple have no money. Their one source of income, rent from a small house, bulldozed by the government last year.
Now I'm left with my grandchildren. I have no money, no water. We're living like destitutes. I don't know what to do. I wish I could get someone to help us to send these children to school. Then I'd be happy. When the sun rises every day, we ask our neighbours for food, but they have nothing to give. If I'd had some money, I'd have paid the water bill.
Today's Solidarity Peace Trust report says school enrolment and attendance has dropped right off. People are failing to access even basic health care too. Hunger is rife. In Harare, a government minister dismissed the report as absolutely not true. Another told Channel 4 News tonight that the government had been building houses and was doing so under what he called illegal sanctions imposed by the UK and the US, which were making conditions extremely difficult. With Zimbabwe in meltdown and its economy in freefall, the veteran president, Robert Mugabe, attended the state opening of Parliament last month. Here's a country spending its money buying jet fighters from China, 6 more ordered last week, and a president spending his time decrying his critics as agents of violence and purveyors of falsehood.
He claims he's already won the election, but Zimbabwe's opposition leader now fears a different kind of battle in a runoff against President Mugabe.
In the runoff, violence will thus be the new weapon to reverse the people's win. In this regard, we know that thousands of army recruits are being recruited, militants are being rehabilitated, and some few claiming to be war veterans are already on the warpath.
Yesterday, President Mugabe's ZANU-PF supporters were on the streets of Harare, amongst them the war veterans, his vanguard. Tomorrow, the opposition will try again to lodge a legal case demanding that the presidential result be declared. But 7 days after the vote, the Electoral Commission remains unhurried. In London, hosting the Progressive Government's conference, the Prime Minister urged haste, but seemed to accept that a runoff was now inevitable.
Well, I think we're all agreed that the election results should be published and they shouldn't be delayed, and the elections have got to be seen to be fair. We are determined that, of course, there are international observers if there is a second round. I've talked, in addition to talking to President Mbeki about that, I've talked to President Museveni in Uganda, President Kikwete, who's head of the African Union, and the determination of everybody is that not only are results not delayed where that is unnecessary, but equally the results are seen to be fair, and that requires the observers that we've just been talking about.
The South African president was irritated that everyone seemed to want him to do something about his troublesome neighbour.
Should there be international observers in that country?
You know, Zimbabwe is not a South African province. Can we agree about that? Thanks. Both President Mugabe and Morgan Tsvangirai have said in the event that there's need for a runoff, nobody has got the required numbers. They are quite ready, both sides, to have a rerun of presidential elections, and I think let's allow and assist that election process to go forward as planned.
But few of the 2 million Zimbabweans in President Mbeki's country have the same patience. In Johannesburg, they're looking for work or buying basic foodstuffs. They say their future depends on the election result.
You know, the votes is only one day, but now the results 1 week. What does that mean? It means you want to cheat.
Mugabe is going to intimidate people by using the war veterans, the police and the army to beat people.
At the bus station, some worry they won't get home because of roadblocks. Many really thought the opposition would win this time, but now their hope is fading.
Mugabe magic is really working,
All the Zimbabweans I've met here say that they believe President Mugabe lost the election, and that's why he's not allowing the results to be released. They blame him for the fact that they have to come here to buy food, there's none at home. But they no longer think that he's going to relinquish power. Lindsay Hilsum, Channel 4 News, Johannesburg.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Crooning on her husband's birthday, 43 years her senior. For Grace, life has been amazing.
Saka, his word will be final. Mark my words, his word will be final.
She gets what she wants, it seems: land, property, political power, without the trouble of being elected. But are we about to see the fall of Grace? These, the publicity shots of South African model Gabriella Engels. Her face is her fortune. And this, she says, is what Zimbabwe's First Lady did to her face, body and head, beating her furiously with an electrical flex attached to a plug.
We confirmed that I was assaulted by Grace Mugabe in the hotel room while her bodyguards stood back and watched her beat me and my friends. I had no clue who who this woman was, and she started beating me.
It all happened on Sunday, she says, in a room at this Johannesburg hotel. And Gabriella Engels strongly denies dating either of the Mugabe's Playboy sons, Robert Jr. or Chatunga, both said to be at the hotel that day and seen here on another occasion with their entourage in party mode. The police confirm they've received a complaint of assault with intent to cause grievous bodily harm and have put South Africa's frontiers on red alert to stop Grace Mugabe fleeing the country after she failed to attend a police hearing on Tuesday. After that, matters have gathered momentum. Robert Mugabe has now flown to South Africa as Zimbabwe tries to claim diplomatic immunity. And he's involved. Yep, South Africa's star prosecutor, Gerrie Nel, the man who put away Oscar Pistorius for murder. At a press conference this afternoon in Johannesburg, Nel said that if South African authorities don't prosecute Zimbabwe's First Lady, he'll do it privately, and claimed people were already trying to buy off the alleged victim.
The family's even been approached via third party to accept an amount of money to settle this. So, and the family's not interested in doing that.
Those seeking prosecution also said there is no diplomatic immunity, which Zimbabwe wants, against this kind of offence.
Given the legislation that we have, given the international conventions that are applicable, we are of the opinion that there's a clear-cut case to be made that the Department of International Relations is not in a position to grant diplomatic immunity to the First Lady of Zimbabwe in these circumstances.
Gabriella Engels was at the press conference, though for legal reasons said nothing, leaving it to her mother.
At least now I can sleep a little bit more peaceful knowing that I have people in my corner that's going to help me fight to get justice for my daughter.
That Grace Mugabe may well have anger management problems is not open to doubt.
George, you are a prolific writer. You will do.
Here she is publicly humiliating Zimbabwe's chief government spin doctor for failing to secure positive press coverage that she required. The British photojournalist Richard Jones claimed the First Lady punched him when he was on assignment in Hong Kong. Medics said the impact of a diamond-encrusted ring worsened the injuries. China accepted diplomatic immunity and Grace Mugabe escaped prosecution. And she denies the assault. So what does the president of 37 years, Robert Mugabe, do about all this? Well, he's let it be known he wants to hand her the reins of power at a time of his choosing. First, though, he's got to get her out of South Africa.
They were heading to one place with one idea. Cheered along the way, they had one flag, the Zimbabwean flag, a symbol of hope and unity for the tens of thousands, maybe more, who turned out. Singing and dancing as if already celebrating victory, convinced that their ageing, failing, stubborn president must now bow to the popular will.
We are looking at the worst person who has done the worst things to this country, who has failed the country, is the president.
Zimbabwe is a peaceful nation.
Time for an old man to retire, they say.
There's an incredible atmosphere of excitement and expectation. Everybody wants their photograph taken. Everybody wants to be seen to be part of this. And what's extraordinary is these are not all opposition supporters. Some of them are people from Mugabe's own party. The army called for this, the war veterans, the very people who have made this man president, who have kept him in place for 37 years. They're all turning against him.
Some were supporters until just the other day, loyal members of Mugabe's ZANU-PF party.
This is a turnaround whereby we want people to be free, to get whatever they want in a free and a democratic country. We are the group from Bulawayo who booed the First Lady and say, boo, 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 boo.
That's what did it. The First Lady, Gucci Grace Mugabe's machinations to succeed her husband. inspiration for new slogans born of fury and frustration, the tipping point for those who had kept the faith until now. Were President and Mrs. Mugabe watching from his house, where they've been confined by the military? The rally was shown on state TV, unimaginable just a week ago. Dignitaries swept up, former ministers, veterans of the Liberation War, once the bedrock of Mugabe's support. Amongst them, Joyce Majuru, a comrade from the old days, vice president until Grace Mugabe manoeuvred her out of office. Nowadays, anyone who opposes the president is a hero to this crowd.
When must Mugabe go, Mrs. Joyce?
We know the program is going to come now.
Will he go?
Another ousted vice president, Emerson Mnangagwa, is touted as Mugabe's replacement. People want to overlook his responsibility for mass killing in MATABELELAND in the 1980s.
It's not true. Mnangagwa, everybody, we are from Bulawayo. We love him. He has shown us love. He has shown us development.
They left the rally in hope, ready to march on State House to make their point at the centre of power. On the road, they saw soldiers, the men of the moment. Everyone in the crowd supports the role the military has played in bringing the country to this point. They spotted a helicopter overhead, the army surveying the crowd, or Comrade Bob finally departing. At State House, the demonstrators came face to face with the presidential guard, and then another political figure arrived, Morgan Tsvangirai, the leader of the opposition Movement for Democratic Change.
What you have done is to demonstrate that although the military has intervened, it has the whole support of the people of Zimbabwe.
And the people remained, waiting for news, waiting for the president to quit. A few hours later, a motorcade left the Mugabe's residence. Was he in it? Was she? Zimbabwe waits.